Hey everyone, it's me, Aaron, Professor Thorgy, and welcome to another episode of Thorgy's Picks, the show every single week in which I spotlight a comic book recommendation, and then I put a link in the description down below of where you can find that comic, and if you buy that book or anything else on Amazon, as long as you start by going through that link, we get a small cut of the profits. It's a great way to treat yourself and help support this channel at the same time. And this week, in honor of Uncanny X-Men being announced, I wanted to come in here and spotlight my favorite X-Men storyline of all time, which turned out to be really hard to do because the X-Men have a ton of great storylines, but I don't really know which one I would come in here and recommend to everyone. I don't know which one I would come in here and go, no, if you were going to read any X-Men book, this is the one you have to read. Because there's tons of storylines that I absolutely love, like Second Coming, that will make zero sense to you unless you were reading all the stuff before that and all the other books happening at that same time. Those aren't exactly great jumper on books. Those aren't exactly the kind of books that you recommend to someone who has never really read an X-Men book and they want to know where they should start. You probably shouldn't throw them headfirst into the deep end of the pool on that one. And then there's other books out there like X Factor by Peter David. That is one of my favorite series of all time, hands down. But it's not really the X-Men. It's a detective agency offshoot that just happens to have mutants working there and has an X in the title. Yeah, it's not really, when someone asks for an X-Men book, they're not really talking about that. And then I love stuff like Exiles. I've talked about the Exiles a couple of times on this channel. But those are reality-hopping mutants who are very loosely tied to the X-Men. Don't really have anything to do with them other than the fact that they're mutants. So yeah, again, if you're looking for an X-Men storyline, can't really point you towards that. So I had to sit down and really focus on this one. I had to stop and think to myself, okay, what is a book that tells a story that really captures what the X-Men should be? What is a book with great characters in there and every single character is written exactly how they should be portrayed? What is a book that gets to the heart of what the X-Men are, but at the same time is kind of simple for new readers to jump into? What is a storyline where you don't need to know 12 other things that happen right before this in order to understand this one? And I know there are people out there going, well, who on earth hasn't read an X-Men storyline before? Who on earth doesn't know these characters? Lots of people. One thing that you have to understand about comics is that every single day, hundreds of people out there are deciding, you know what, I've never read this character and I know nothing about them, but for no reason at all, I think today's the day I'm going to start reading about this character. So for that audience out there, I have to recommend Astonishing X-Men by Joss Whedon. Now, okay, before I go ahead with my pitch on this book, let me just go ahead and say, yes, this is, in my opinion, the easiest book for any new reader to jump into for the X-Men. However, there are no X-Men storylines out there that don't at least have some backstory to it. The X-Men are the longest running soap opera in comic book history. Yeah, if you jump into any book, there's going to be some past relationships, some history with these characters that comes back up. There's going to be some twists and turns that recently happened that are affecting what's going on now. It's kind of next to impossible to jump into any X-Men book without needing at least a tiny bit of info on what happened before that. Unless you just want to read Ultimate X-Men, where they literally just created an entire alternate universe where you didn't need to know any of this stuff, but I'm sticking with the main Marvel universe right now. So, yes, you do need to know some stuff for this. Basically, what you need to know is that right before this book began, Cyclops ended up cheating on his wife, Jean Grey, with Emma Frost, who used to be a villain to the X-Men, but now she had become a good guy and was working at the school. As I said, this is all one massive soap opera. But also right before this, a giant sentinel, the mutant hunting robots created by the government, decided to attack Genosha, which was an island that mutants had decided to start living on peacefully, and it wiped out the entire island, and now Charles Xavier had left the school to go to that island to try and help rebuild over there. And Jean Grey had also just died. So those are basically the three main points that you need to know about what happened right before this storyline began. And with Jean Grey dead and Professor X gone, it kind of looked like, yeah, the X-Men might not be around anymore. Nobody's really here to run this school, and we don't know what the future holds for this team. But Cyclops is deciding, darn it, I'm going to get things back in order. It's time that we go out there, we be superheroes again, we protect the world that hates and fears us, we get everything running again. So he decides to reassemble a brand new X-Men team, gives them brand new costumes, and says we're going out there to protect this world, but at the same time we're also going to run this school. That's what the X-Men is about. And that's why I say this is probably the easiest book for any new reader to jump into for the X-Men. It's the most X-Men book that you could find. Because it's not, oh, well, it's the X-Men, but this thing is different and it's happening over here. It's the X-Men, but with this one little twist. This was when the X-Men said it's time that we get back to basics. And you know something? It's also incredibly well written. This was the first Joss Whedon comic book that I had ever read. In fact, in all honesty, I never watched Buffy, I never watched Angel, I never watched any of those other shows that he had done before this. So this was also kind of my first exposure to Joss Whedon. That guy writes some good X-Men. And what I mean when I say that is that you've got Wolverine, you've got Cyclops, you've got Emma Frost, you've got Kitty Pryde, you've got Beast, and you've got Colossus on this team. 6 very different characters with very different personalities, and Joss Whedon writes every single one of them exactly like that character should be written. If you ever want to know what does Cyclops act like, read this storyline, and you will go, oh, that's what Cyclops is like. That's what Wolverine is like. That's what the Beast is like. That's what Kitty Pryde is like. That's what Emma Frost is like. He nailed all their characters, and yet they, at the same time, while being very different from each other, fit into place on this team like puzzle pieces snapping together. This honestly has some of my favorite Wolverine moments of all time in here, just because of how well he captured who Wolverine is in this book. There was a moment in which the team was fighting a giant monster, and every single character got one page of them fighting the monster, and as they fought it, you got their internal dialogue. And all of them were unsure of themselves, thinking about where they fit in, what they should be doing now, how odd it was to be on this team, how odd it was to be back from the dead. That's something that happens to a certain character in this book. But yes, every single one of them had major stuff to deal with. Wolverine was tearing into this monster. No thoughts, no thoughts, no thoughts, no thoughts. Final panel, I really like beer. That's Wolverine. Don't get me wrong, Wolverine is far more complex than that, but when he is slicing into a giant monster, he is slicing into a giant monster. He doesn't have time for personal drama when he is trying to stop something from wrecking Fifth Avenue. Yeah, I absolutely loved little moments like that. And as I said, Wolverine is a lot deeper than that. He does have many sides to himself. And there are many times in this storyline in which you will be reading it and you'll go, oh my goodness, Wolverine got really deep right there. And yet it still feels like the same character I was reading a moment ago who just stopped to mention how much he likes beer. Or Cyclops. This is hands down the best Cyclops storyline of all time. I will go ahead and say that right now. And honestly, I grew up loving Cyclops. When I was a kid, Cyclops was probably my favorite member of the X-Men. And that's something that the comic book community always tries to make you feel ashamed for. Everyone always hates Cyclops. People always talk about Cyclops like he's the ultimate punchline to the X-Men joke, because a lot of people look at him like he's just a bag of mayonnaise, like he's just a super basic, he's just brown-haired guy who just stands up there with a chiseled jaw. And I'm like, no, he's not. He's a guy who will murder anyone he looks at if he doesn't have his special glasses on. He's kind of tortured. He kind of has a massive problem going on. The reason why Cyclops seems so straight edge, the reason why he seems so basic, is because he's constantly having to think about the fact that my face is a living weapon and I can't control it. Yeah, he's kind of got a lot of stuff to deal with. So yeah, I always kind of looked at Cyclops and went, wow, he's dealing with all that. And also, everyone around him keeps dying and coming back to life, and he's got evil clones of the woman he loved coming into his life, and he's got a son coming back from the future, and this hairy guy keeps trying to steal his wife and keeps threatening to murder him as well, but he's his teammate, so he has to look after him nonetheless. Cyclops is a guy who is dealing with a lot, but he still steps up to be the leader of the X-Men. That's the thing that I always liked about Cyclops. He's a guy who is constantly dealing with a mountain of pressure on his back, and he still just stands up, and he acts professional, and he goes out there to save the day and lead his team to victory. That's what I always kind of admired about him. This book nailed that. This book really gets inside of Cyclops' head and shows you just how far down that rabbit hole he is. It shows you, yeah, I'm kind of a messed up individual, but goddammit, someone has to step up to lead the X-Men. I'm gonna do it. And as I said, any X-Men book out there, you're gonna need to know some stuff before you start reading the book. And yeah, I already gave you all the stuff that you need to know before you start reading this book. But there are other things about the history of the X-Men that do get brought up in this series. However, I don't need to stop and explain those things to you before you start reading this book, because this book does an amazing job of taking all these characters' past relationships, their histories, their origins, everything that they've dealt with, and just working it into the plot masterfully. Every single time that they have to bring up something important about the history of these characters, it feels so natural. It does not feel like they had to stop and turn to the camera and go, here's everything you need to know about this scene. No, every single time that they need to give you information, it feels natural. That's the best way that I can describe it. Every single time that they have to describe, here's the reason why this character died, and it's kind of important that he's coming back because of a thing that he's doing with this lady over here, and they have this past thing going on, and they have some unsaid stuff happening. It all just comes about naturally in the book. It all feels like, yeah, that's kind of how it would come up, and you introduce it so well in here that I feel like anybody who didn't know that stuff going into this would understand it now. Heck, this book took about a year-long break in the middle of it, and when they came back, another storyline had happened called House of M, and in that storyline, about 99% of all the mutants on the planet had had their powers taken away. Joss Whedon came in here and just said, things have changed since we were gone. Ignore it. Who cares? I think that kind of sums up one of the reasons why I like this run so much. It takes all of the complex, crazy stuff that happens with the X-Men on a daily basis, and it just comes in here and goes, do you need to know that? No? Then we're not going to talk about it. Do you need to know it? Yes? Okay, we will talk about it in a way that all of you can understand. So okay, I could go into other details on this book. I could talk about the amazing relationship that develops between Emma Frost and Kitty Pryde and the great dialogue exchanges between those two characters. I could talk about how this elevated Kitty Pryde up to a whole new level in my book, and I had a brand newfound respect for that character. But I'm not going to come in here and spoil anything else for you. This is, in my personal opinion, probably the best X-Men series for anyone to start with, and if I had to be completely 100% honest, it's my absolute favorite X-Men series, period. It's my favorite X-Men storyline of all time, and back when I was working in the comic book store, I constantly saw people come into the store with their friends, and they would recommend this book to their friends, and they would tell their friends, I never read an X-Men book before this one either, and I absolutely loved it, so I want you to start reading it as well. So I have seen, for a fact, this is a great X-Men book for brand new readers. So that's my recommendation today. As I said, you will be able to find it in the description down below, and if you decide to buy that book either digitally, physically, however you want, as long as you buy it through that link going to Amazon, or anything else on Amazon, as long as you start by going through that link, we get a small cut of the profits. Thanks for tuning in, everyone, and as always, you can follow me on Twitter, Twitch, and Tumblr at Professor Thorgy, and let me know what your favorite X-Men storylines of all time were in the comments down below. Thanks for tuning in, everyone. Come back next time. Bye.